This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, it's another interview episode.
Here we go.
Buckle up.
Who do we got?
Well, of course, we have Chip Midnight. Welcome, Chip.
Yes.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Our interviewer extraordinaire, our man of the pen and the tape recorder. And I'm sure you don't use a pen and a tape recorder anymore for your interviews because you use Zoom like everybody else.
Absolutely correct.
But back in the day, you put the little micro cassette recorder down and did those kinds of things.
The artist that I'm bringing you today, is a band that I interviewed, and I used a tape recorder to interview that interview in 1994. Sorry, I should clarify. I interviewed them in 1994, and then I interviewed them very recently. But this time I use Zoom. Yes.
Why don't you share with our audience here who you have revisited in your interview history?
Yeah, for me, this is one of those perfect examples of a dig me out kind of band, all the way from the UK, Fretblanket. So I don't know if you guys know Fretblanket. They put out two records, 94's Junkfuel and 1997's Home Truths from Abroad. 97, they had a video for Into the Ocean, which had, I'd say, a minor hit, in terms of 1997 and whatever that means. They were on this TV show, and I don't know if you guys remember this. It was called 12 Angry Viewers, and they would bring in people, and they'd sit them on a couch, and it was kind of like I have to admit, like I don't remember much about it. I feel like they brought in 12 viewers. They showed them some videos, and it was almost like a competition. Like, what do you think of this video? Should we add it to rotation or not? And they'd show it, and they'd let the table, kind of like a round table. Everybody got to sit around and talk about the video and whether or not it would go on to get played. And Into the Ocean did get picked up and played after that show.
Yeah, I remember that being, oh man, that must have been late. Was it mid to late 90s MTV?
Yeah, because that single came out in 97, so it would have been 97-ish.
It's after they figured out that they could do like game shows and remote control and all those kinds of things.
No, I'm not positive. I know somebody I went to college with who moved to New York City was on that show, and I'm almost positive that she was one of the 12 angry viewers for that particular episode and voted for Fretblanket to move forward. I had, it was years after I graduated college, so I had lost touch with her, but I saw her on, and I'm like, I know that person, and I'm pretty sure it was a Fretblanket episode.
That's awesome.
So the question back to you guys, do you know Fretblanket?
Only by name.
Yeah, I mean, it's a memorable name, that's for sure. I have no idea what it means.
All right.
But I remember the name, that's it.
I got this pulled up, so I'm going to read directly from my 1994 review, just to kind of give you context of what I thought of it back then. All right. And I wrote this for a magazine called Moo Magazine that I wrote for in Columbus, Ohio in the mid-90s. So I wrote the review that said, in my meager existence of fast food, bean burritos, and 3 beer buzzes, not much excites me. These scratch-off instant lottery tickets with their occasional $3 rewards just aren't cutting the mustard anymore. And then I receive a copy of Fretblanket's Junkfuel via the Postmaster General. Had this album been released by Soul Asylum, Nirvana, Sugar, or any of the other power hitters in the 120 minutes lineup, it would have sold a gazillion copies. Instead, this disc will end up in a number of used CD bins. Really a shame, but at least you won't have to pay as much to hear a gem of a record. Catchy pop anthems with solid rock foundations. This is the album that Kurt Cobain dreamed of recording with Michael Stipe before putting a slug through his head.
What?
Yeah, kicking off in fine
I didn't see that coming.
I don't know what there's just those 3 beer buzzes apparently. Kicking off in fine fashion with Twisted, Fretblanket has produced an album well worthy of heavy rotation on alternative and college radio stations. Personal favorites include Twisted, Junkfuel, and Song and B, in which Copley sings just a smidgen like our long lost grunge generation spokesman. All right, I gotta expand the window here. Forget about plunking down money for Nirvana bootlegs of Kurt's final few shows. Spend the money on the future of rock and roll. Spend the money on Fretblanket.
Well, that was a very positive review, mixed in with some very timely
with a dark
slash kind of disturbing twist.
So I don't know if you guys remember that time period, and we've done the roundtable about Nirvana, but I know that Kurt Cobain had talked about recording with Michael Stipe, that he wanted to get a little bit out of the grunge stuff and do some more alternative sounding music, and Will Copley, who's the singer for Fretblanket, has sort of that raspy kind of grungy voice, although they're certainly not a grunge band. And so I think that was what I was trying to get across there, is that like he had that grunge vocals, but more of the like I said, Sugar, Nirvana, Doughboys, kind of just like an alternative rock sound, not so much grungy sound. In the interview, I'll tell you that they were super young when they got signed. Will had not graduated high school yet. The other guys had just graduated high school and were sort of trying to figure out what they were going to do with their lives when this record offer came. But Will was still in high school and sort of had to figure that out. I listen to that album still. It's on Spotify. And I still have the CD, and you can still find it in used bins really cheap if you look. His voice sounded so mature for being a 17-year-old high school kid. It still blows me away. It's very anthemic. Again, it's not grunge music, but it's like grunge vocals. I love it. I listen to it all the time still. The second record did not make it to Spotify yet, and we talk about that a little bit, and I think that they're a little bit confused why it's not there, and they're going to try to figure out how to get it up there. But I talked to Will Copley, who was the singer, guitar player, and the bass player, Dave Allsopp. I will mention, it's kind of funny. So when the internet started, or like early days of the internet, that was one of my favorite things, was digging out these people who I had been listening to and trying to figure out, like Fretblanket, in those days, they put out an album in 94 and then the second album in 97. So 3 years was a long time. It felt like a lot of stuff in the music industry changed. And then after 97, I never heard from them again. And so like 98, 99, I'm not Googling, whatever the search engine was, Yahoo or, and I actually ran across Dave, who had moved to the US, and he talks about that in the interview. And he played in a couple bands in like the Baltimore and DC area, just like little bands that I don't think really ever did anything. But I could never find out what happened to the rest of the guys. And so fast forward, every couple of years I get that, like, again, the idea of digging out what happened to Fretblanket. And I keep looking up the singer's name. Will Copley is not necessarily an unusual name, but it's not a common name. And I ran across his LinkedIn profile, and, it was a little bit, and he's like in the telecommunications industry. And I found like a page on a website of the company he works for that talks about Will, and his career. And I don't remember if there's mention of music at all. And I'm like, I know it's the same guy, but like maybe he's completely disowning his past. But he didn't. And I'm trying to think how this all came about. I never worked up the nerve to send him, a LinkedIn request, because that would be, in my mind, kind of super weird. Like, hey, telecommunications guy, are you the same guy that was a singer for this band? But I think somewhere I saw that they were going to put out a new single or something, or maybe I followed an Instagram account or something. But somehow I knew there's activity in the Fretblanket camp, so I did send him a LinkedIn message. I'm like, hey, I would love to talk to you about this stuff, 25, 30 years later. And he was very kind and replied back, and was surprised, I think, a little bit that I had found him, and that, anybody still cared about his band. But in the interview, so he you'll hear in the interview, he says that they're a little bit rusty at this whole interview thing. Cause nobody's really cared about the band in 25 years, and they're somewhat forgotten. And, I don't know that this was the only interview that he's done, but it might be the only interview that he's done in the recently. But so the reason for the buzz is that they are playing 2 shows coming up in April. These are shows he mentions in the interview that one show is he can walk across the street and go in the front door of the club. It's basically that close. And this is really
my favorite kind of show.
Yeah, this is really a band that broke up because, and I think they mentioned that they didn't even really break up. It just sort of, things just weren't happening. They kind of finished a tour. They all went home to start thinking about a third record. And then, they started realizing, wow, before that third record comes out, we got to get some jobs. And, there was no hard feelings. Nobody quit. There wasn't a big fight. It was just, by the time the third record came around, they realized that the ship had sailed and they should figure out what they wanted to do with their lives. And so they're doing the reunion shows, I think, just because they've maintained this relationship and they're like, hey, it has been 30 years since we signed a record deal. Maybe we should do something. Yeah. But the other big news too is that they recorded a third record with, I'm going to say his last name wrong, and I don't even know, he might have been a guest at one point. Or maybe you've talked about him, Tim Patalan.
Yeah, we've talked about him, but he hasn't been on the show.
So he's done stuff with Sponge and Watershed, right? They recorded their third record, I think they said in 99 or 2000 with him. And nothing happened with it. It never came out. I don't know if it was demos or whether it was intended to be a third record, but they have come across all this content. They've decided, what the heck, might as well put it out. So the long lost third Fretblanket record is going to be coming out, I think on March 30th, I believe. Cool. They put out a couple singles. I don't think they did anything to it. It's all from 20, 22, 23, 24 years ago.
Just dusted off the tapes and send them to the vinyl pressing place, and they're gonna have a record. That's pretty cool.
That's great.
Yeah. They were a band. So I'll say real quick. I know we're running out of time here. They were a band sort of stuck in time, right? That they came to the U.S. They had all these chances in the U.S. Nothing ever really happened for them in the U.S. The only tour that they could remember doing, they did one-off dates here and there, and they picked up a couple of shows. But the only really touring they did was with, at that point, it was just Boingo, not Oingo Boingo, which is a total mismatch. I saw them play a show in Cincinnati. They headlined, I think. I don't remember much about the show, but that's where I interviewed them. But they were just a band that I'm convinced that if one of their singles had gotten more airplay, or they were like one lucky break away from being huge, in my opinion. I think it's phenomenal music, and I think everybody should check them out.
Is it available on streaming?
Junkfuel is the first record. Home Truth from Abroad is not yet, but like I said, that's one that they're sort of working on.
And I assume the new one will be.
Yeah. The new one, I asked them about the vinyl craze and if they're going to do any vinyl, and they said that, no, I think.
Oh, they're not.
No, I think it'll be limited copies of the CD, but mostly digital. I think that they are happy that people still care, but they don't think that they have hundreds and thousands of fans that would buy vinyl right now. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to the interview with Chip.
All right, so welcome, Dig Me Out listeners. I am here with Will and Dave from the band Fretblanket. How are you guys doing today?
Very good.
Very well, thank you.
Very good. You guys are in the UK. You're 5 hours ahead of me, so it's nighttime for you. It's middle afternoon for me. Dave is not. He's raising his hand.
I am raising my hand. I am not in the UK. I'm actually just outside of Washington, D.C.
Oh, nice.
Which is where I've been living for the last, 25 years.
So we are going to get into that. And I actually think I know that. So I'm gonna start off by telling you guys a little quick story. And I emailed Will this. I got Junkfuel in the mail. We were talking before we started recording about, me being a journalist, and I'd come home and I'd get packages in the mail and I'd go through the CDs, and they piled up, and every once in a while I'd throw one in and I'd give it a quick listen and then go to the next one. And Junkfuel was one of those ones that when I put it in, it stayed in for the whole duration. and I fell in love with it. Will, I sent you the review, and I think I said something like in a world of cheap bean burritos and 3 beer buzzes, I was looking for something to kind of give me meaning to life and something that made life worth living. And Fretblanket was that band for me. So that was my initial thing. And then I ended up interviewing you guys for a magazine called Moo Magazine. You were on tour and you were in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is about a 2-hour drive from where I'm at. You played at Sudsy Malone's, which was a laundromat / venue. That is all I remember. I don't know if you were on tour with another band or if you were headlining.
We were definitely on tour. That's for sure. And the recollection I have of Sudsy Malone's is that it was a laundromat.
Yes,
if I'm not mistaken, and that was extremely unusual for us. Obviously, I think a lot of what we did at that time was quite alien to us, especially when we were coming over to the US, and we were just very sort of culturally unaware, but playing in a laundromat was a new one for us, and I seem to recall that was one that we were kind of looking forward to, because we were like, "What's this going to be about?" And it turned out to be just like playing in a laundromat,
yes,
in front of a bunch of people doing their laundry.
Do you remember? Were you on a tour with another band, or were you guys kind of doing your own dates? Here's my memory, and I'm confusing memories. I mentioned before we started recording too that memories from 1994 or 1995 are a little bit fuzzy for me. I definitely know that I saw the band Knapsack at Sudsy Malone's. Would you have been playing with Knapsack? Probably not, based on your...
Not ring a bell.
Okay.
I think at that stage, Will can probably correct me here, I think we were on our own at that point.
I think we might have been. What can you remember about the van, Chip? Was it like just to afford,
I don't remember at all.
So yeah. I think we didn't.
It wasn't a tour bus, was it?
No. It was a van.
Okay. Then we were definitely on our own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Dave, I will get to the fact that you live in the US in a second, because that is another part of my story, but let's kind of go back. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the start of Fretblanket. So it's a 4-piece band. You guys met in school. You were young when the band started, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
If you want to go all the way back to the very beginning, when did we meet? I think, Will, you and I met when I believe our mothers were together at a young mothers meeting or something. You might not even have been born at that point.
Indeed. So yeah, our mothers were in Stourbridge, and was it what was it called now? Was it the NHS? No, not no. Hang on. The national, the NHR. The NHR. They were in the NHR.
Okay.
The National
Housewives Registry or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, Will and I have known each other since we were babies, basically. And I think I met Matt. I'm gonna have to translate to American for you, Will, here. But I think I met Matt when we were in, I'm going to say 3rd grade, and I think I met Clive when I was in 5th grade. So that's when the 4 of us all knew each other as friends. Yeah. I think we probably started playing music together around about 14, something like that.
I think I was 13 and you guys were 14. Yeah.
And so I think listeners, I always tend to tell everybody my age. I'll be 52 this year. You guys are probably just a couple years younger than me.
I've just gone 48.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm about to turn 49.
Okay, so when you were 14 and starting to play music together, what were you listening to at the time? Do you remember?
Well, so at that age, it's very much it's your your formative music years, if you like. So you're almost at your embarrassing first forays into music. But Dave, I remember Dave being into some quite weird metal stuff, hello-y.
Probably not even that weird, just general metal, I'd say.
Just a lot of metal.
80s metal.
You know, I guess.
Matt was pretty into metal too, and I think probably still is, in fact. Whereas Clive brought the more melodic indie pop stuff, didn't he?
Well, quite quickly so at our first the Fretblanket lore, you know, the real early days when we covered When I'm 64 and what else did we cover, Dave?
Well, we were trying to cover I'll tell you. At that time, if I remember rightly, the one thing that kind of brought us all together, oddly enough, for a very short amount of time, was actually U2, I think.
Right.
We kind of I think we all went to see, it was right around the time of Joshua Tree and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I think we went to see Rattle and Hum when that came out at the cinema, their tour movie. And there was something about that just kind of, I don't know, seeing them kind of play, you know, in front of huge crowds, and it was quite inspiring. I think I know I came out of that thinking that looks like a lot of fun. And we just sort of started trying to play it. So I do seem to recall we tried to cover a bit of maybe a bit of U2, but also, a little bit of Beatles. And then some of the other stuff we were listening to at the time that was going on, Stone Roses, we definitely tried to cover. I mean, if I remember rightly, though, it was pretty difficult for us to even get through a song at that point. You know, we were having a hard time even finishing finishing a cover. But I think oddly enough, I think the person who might have really set us on our way was actually Clive's cousin, who I never met, but I know he was a bit older than Clive, and he would give Clive all this really great indie stuff that we had never heard of, and then Clive would sort of filter it through to us. That's how we got into things like Pixies, Swerve Driver, stuff like that, you know, The Wedding Present. And that's when it really started to click, I think, when we were listening to that kind of music. So we sort of brought all those different weird 14-year-old influences and mashed them all together, you know, with the other sort of cooler indie stuff that was going on at the time.
Yeah. I think when I was 14, I mean, I totally get that. When I was 14, I was probably watching MTV and listening to the radio and kind of whatever was being force fed. I was, again, listeners who listen to this enough know that I to this day, but especially in the late 80s, was a huge metal fan, but not even heavy metal, like the hair metal stuff, like the Def Leppard and Poison and Motley Crue and Rat and all that stuff was just, that was my dream, to be in one of those bands. I can't play any instruments, but that was for me. I did not have older siblings, so I was not, or older relatives passing music down to me. So like I said, I really just followed along with whatever was popular at the time. And it wasn't until I was in college that I sort of branched out a little bit. So, I mean, being 14 and liking that stuff makes total sense to me.
There was a lot of Iron Maiden, wasn't there, Dave? And I think the first band I went to see,
quite a bit of Anthrax too, I think.
Anthrax, awesome, yeah, man. The first band I went to see was the Cult. But in terms of other bands, the other thing that is important is of course the Stourbridge bands, and not just the Neds, the Poppies, and the Stuffies, but there was a scene. You know, there were bands playing, and one really local band that was important to us was, you know, the Swamp Donkeys. So we used to go around to see them practicing on a Saturday morning, and you know, they just gave you a bit of belief that, oh, you know, these guys are a band, they can do it, so why can't we?
Those were friends of ours who were maybe a year or two older than us, and they were actually quite accomplished. You know, they could play. So we used to go hang around with them, like Will said, and just watch them practice. And yeah, that was pretty inspiring, I think, wasn't it, in terms of us wanting to get together and do something similar. Maybe not musically similar, but just, you know, the idea of playing like that with you know, all together.
Yeah. Was it always the four of you, or did you have other people come in and out, or how did like
very, very soon it was just the four of us. I think we didn't have a singer for a while.
Yeah, I don't think we were really a proper band until it was just us four, and
that's right.
And then Will came in to sing. I don't think Clive had ever. He didn't even play guitar, did he? Until he joined the band, basically.
Well, that was the same. That was the same for me. I bought a guitar to join the band.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was we wanted to be in a band before we knew how to play instruments. Basically. So that's how that did happen that way. So I mean, there might have been like one or two of the guys, in the extremely early days that we kind of hung around with, but it wasn't really a proper band. I don't think until it was just the four of us.
It was the band once it was the four of us, and I was singing for sure. Yeah, but before that, it was experimental.
Well, it was just sort of trying to figure out how to play our instruments, wasn't it? I suppose.
And that was very early. That, as I say, that was 13, 14. And then not long after those covers, some of which were really, a bit off the wall. Did I dream covering "The Only Way Is Up"?
Wait, you maybe, but it's possible that we did have a go at that. Yeah, we did try some weird stuff, I think.
But then pretty quickly we got our own little. Well, Clive started writing. That's all down to Clive, and we got a little repertoire going. And quite soon enough of a repertoire to play some gigs. So I think
it was quite fortunate, really, wasn't it, that Clive went from literally only picking up guitar for the first time to suddenly becoming a really good songwriter in an extremely short space of time.
Yep.
So I think that was, just serendipity, really. I mean, who knew that he would sort of turn out to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because he really is what was the driving force behind the songwriting, 100%. I mean, we all absolutely contribute to the songwriting, but he was the guy who would come in. He would sit at home with his acoustic guitar. He would come in and be like, "Oh, I think I've got a song here," and then
with a fully formed song,
we'd all play on it. Yeah. And we would all contribute our own parts to the song. He had sort of the skeleton for it. But I mean, without his talent, we wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about it. I don't think.
And so that was 13, 14. You were signed by the time you guys were 17.
Yeah.
I mean, and you got to think. And I don't know this, but I'm assuming like none of you at the time when the band started dropped out of school to concentrate on writing songs, right? And so you're balancing being students, learning instruments, and 3 years later getting a record deal is pretty amazing.
Yeah, the teenage, obsession. It's that absolute single-minded focus on it. Really, I mean, I used to think about little else.
Sure. I mean, we used to practice out Will's house. We were fortunate in that regard, in that we had a space where we could go, and that was literally sort of the stopping point, wasn't it, on the way back from school for everybody. So we would get out of school, we would head straight to Will's house, down the cellar, and start banging away on the instruments pretty much every day, really, wasn't it? I mean,
felt like it. Yeah.
And so, like you said, you were experimenting, trying stuff out. Once it became the four of you, it felt like a real thing. When did the band name come about?
Well, we were the Jellyheads initially.
Briefly. Initially, yeah.
Were we the Painters or something awful for a while?
Well, no, I think what happened was we decided that we wanted a new name, and we went through a whole ton of just like not very good ideas. And then eventually we came upon that one, which was literally a question of, I might be wrong here, but I think it was Chris Perks, our friend. We were just sort of like, let's stick two words together and see what comes out. And, he came up with those two words, and we were like, and like so many things in life, it ended up being that'll do until we can think of something better. and then that was it for forever. So yeah.
So
I'm sure a lot of bands have done that.
No, yeah. So how does the record deal happen? Like, you must have, were you just sending stuff out, or do you have friends in the industry or something?
So Clive was writing songs, and you know, they were getting better. You know, so some of the first few, I think, you know, fair to say, a little bit ropey, and then we got a kind of a solid, you know, set's worth, and then some really started to kind of be notably, you know, sing alongable, really, and we were rehearsing, as well as down my cellar. There was a rehearsal room just off the ring road in Stourbridge, where proper bands were rehearsing, and proper bands with their crew. And you know, the bands would kind of would whisk in and out. We wouldn't particularly see them, but we'd hang around with the crew a little bit, and they'd hang around and hear us play. And the really one of the really great things about Stourbridge and the history of the whole adventure, really, is that far from, you know, these guys in the music business, you know, scoffing at us and going, you know, oh, you know, kids, they were genuinely interested and wanted to see us succeed, and so they listened and would then talk about it with managers and other people, and before we knew it, we had people coming to hear us, and there you go. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, that was definitely a case of, you know, just happening to be in the right place at the right time for us, wasn't it? The fact that there was that studio, that tiny little horrible studio off the ring road, which was great. But I mean, that was the other place we used to go. So we would go to Will's house to practice, and then we would go and hang around, right? The fridge, sort of hoping to hear something or talk to someone.
What was the other song, Dave? I think was it What Do You Know? Because this was pre-Twisted.
Yeah, that was one of them for sure. That might have been the one actually that got the person who essentially hooked us up was Simon Effamy, who worked at the Fridge as an audio engineer. Was also the Wonderstuff's live sound engineer. So he had all those contacts there, and the way that we got from there to the record deal was basically Simon put us in touch with Dave Aldridge, who was the Wonderstuff's ex-manager, and he then had all the contacts with the record labels. So as soon as he got involved and took us under his wing, that's when it really sort of took off. So it really was, again, sort of, right place, right time. We had, you know, they had these kids who were like writing some pretty good songs and did a good live show, and you know, they, like I say, took us under their wing, and sort of we went forward from there.
And they arranged for us to do a demo, which I'm pretty sure was What Do You Know, and a couple of other songs. Perhaps it might have been 28 Feet High, and perhaps even Captain Invisible, which I still think is a cracking song. And then suddenly we were having meetings with record companies in the cellar. So we, you know, it was Polygram, EMI, A&M, Sony. Yeah. And so these guys would literally, you know, come to my parents' house, say hello, climb down the cellar to my, we rehearsed on one side and I slept in the other side. And they'd come down and sit on the floor and pitch to us and say, this is why you should sign a 7-album record deal with us, lads.
And again, you guys are teenagers.
Sorry, say again.
Sorry, it looks like my microphone keeps switching. It's trying to pick up It's coming through the microphone part, right?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
It keeps changing. I keep getting a pop-up that it's changing to my webcam microphone. Anyway, but you guys were still. I mean, were your parents down there listening to these pitches? Were your families there? I mean,
no, not at that, but not at that point. But when we decided, well, there was a conference, wasn't there, Dave, at your parents' house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, they all got together. This was when we got to the point. I mean, they could sort of see where it was going, and they were all very supportive of what we were doing. When it got to the point where we were actually literally about to sign a record deal, we all had a sort of a families meeting and all talked about it just to make sure we were doing the right thing. Because what you've got to bear in mind is that at that point we were, Matt, Clive, and myself were on the verge of graduating from high school. We were about to go off to university. We'd all applied and been accepted to go to university to do various things. And Will, at that point, Will is a year younger than we are, so he was just about to go into the equivalent of 12th grade. And so he had to drop out basically to if he wanted to continue. So for us, it was a slightly less difficult decision because obviously we could just sort of defer our placements at university. And the idea was, if this doesn't work out, we can always go back and study and do other things. And it would be foolish for us to miss up on this, to pass up on this opportunity. I think, Will, maybe a bit more of a difficult decision for you, given that you had to drop out, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a thing. I mean, funnily enough, having a 14-year-old lad now, we're having discussions about, if you stop doing this, you close the door on that, and blah 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 blah. But having said that, we were being offered a record deal, and I think our parents recognized that was actually pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, they absolutely understood that this was not an opportunity that a lot of people get. So they were supportive.
Yeah. So I don't even remember. I mean, like I said, I have the CD, but I don't remember what label did you end up signing with?
Well, it was Polygram.
Okay.
It was specifically, we were signed to Atlas Records, which was a subsidiary of Polygram at that point.
Nick Gatfield, who had been at EMI, had signed Radiohead to EMI, then moved to Polygram and was given his own vehicle. I think the guy who signs Radiohead probably gets his own label, and obviously he had impeccable taste, and made a and he's a very joking aside, he is a very talented and bright chap all round. Do you know? I remember him picking up the Game Boy and annoyingly finishing Tetris, and he would sit down at a grand piano and annoyingly play the piano, and pick up a cello and annoyingly play the cello. He was a very bright guy and made a really good pitch, and I think he had a good organization there, right? And clearly, liked us, valued us, said all the right things about us having a career and giving us time to develop and all that stuff, which to a large extent he followed through on.
Well, I think that we made the right choice going with him ultimately. I'm going to say that perhaps we wouldn't have had the chance to make Home Truths if we hadn't gone with Nick Gatfield, because we were kind of his pet project, weren't we? Really, at that point. So he gave us lots of chances. I think also one of the reasons we were interested in doing that was because sort of the pitch was that most of what we would be doing would be in the States, right? They had definitely had this idea that our music would work better in America than it might in the UK at that time. I mean, we're sort of, I guess they were sort of in the very early stages of Britpop at that point, right? And we were definitely not a Britpop band. And I think there was something to be said for the idea that what we were doing was probably going to be a bit more appealing to an American audience at that point.
They, you know, of course, it's the holy grail, isn't it? To go and break America, and they thought we might be able to do it with the lyrical, and I'm sorry, you know, avoid the word really, but we did have a grungy sound. The voice was grungy, so that kind of crossover, you know, it could have worked, you know.
But I think obviously, you know, with years of hindsight, you do realize, of course, that essentially we were one of many, you know, 4-piece white male guitar rock band who were signed in the wake of Nirvana and grunge to sort of hopefully try and continue that movement along. You know what I mean? So I'm sure you've talked to many other bands who have been in that exact position, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
Yeah. So, you know.
Yeah. But Will, I mean, your voice was very mature sounding. I mean, I think in that review, I talked about Kurt Cobain and Sugar, and so it does make sense that, like, in my mind, you did fit the U.S. alternative sound at the time. There was definitely the grunge stuff, but I mean, Sugar wasn't really a grunge band, but you know, I kind of heard that, a little bit of that in your music as well. Did I know a band in Ohio? They're not around anymore. It was about 5-6 years ago, and they had some management interest, and the person who signed the 1975 ended up managing them.
Cool.
And his advice to them, not his advice, what he told them to do is stop playing shows, go to the basement, write for the next year, and come out, write 100 songs and come out with 10 really good ones. Were you given that kind of advice, or was it like they signed you and whisked you into the studio and then there you go?
I'm not sure what advice was given to Clive. Clive was driven to write and took writing seriously, but it felt more like the latter. When you look at the timeline, you know, we went off to New York and signed the label, and we certainly, I don't know, we didn't immediately tour, but we went into the studio. It felt like quickly, right, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything happened quickly back then, oddly enough. I mean, all this happened in a pretty short space of time, but at the same time, I don't recall being told to go and write a ton of songs, but I know that we did that anyway. It was like, that's just what we were doing naturally. I mean, I know we demoed every single song that was on Junkfuel. We recorded it before we recorded it for real. But we must have recorded at least twice as many songs, like if not 3 times as many songs. I think we must have had at least 25, 30, maybe even 40 songs at that point.
Wow, was it that many? Okay.
I mean, I still have a bunch of these on cassette, right? That are sort of lost to time. And to be fair, the ones that we left off were left off, you know, for good reason, right? The best ones went on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was definitely part of the process. It wasn't like it wasn't like Junkfuel sort of sprang fully formed, you know, one afternoon from a writing session. It was definitely a lot of hard work. A lot of songs got written, got completed, and got recorded, and then were just almost immediately just discarded as like, that one's not going to make the cut. But that was probably closer to the time that we actually went in to record, I'm going to say, because Junkfuel came out in 94. We recorded it in 93, I believe. So, and we signed in late 92. So I think 93, we basically just spent the entire year writing. But then I'm like, we also toured in 93. So like, what were we doing? We must have just been like nonstop writing, recording, and touring.
Well, you know, there's a lot of time when you're not, you know, looking after kids and earning a living.
Well,
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where did you record?
Well, we did all those initial demos at the Fridge in Stourbridge, the ice house. We did a lot there.
Wow.
and we did some in Birmingham, some of those demos. The album, okay, let's see. Junkfuel itself was recorded at Ridge Farm.
Yeah.
This is where our memories are going to start getting fuzzy, because all these studios kind of blur together after a while. Pretty sure Junkfuel was at Ridge Farm, which was I don't think it exists anymore.
Oh, no, hold on. No, hold on.
Oh, Will's got
Comfort's
the
Place.
facts in front of him.
I have. I've dug out the gig diary. Comfort's Place, according to the gig diary.
Okay, which was also a residential studio in Surrey, right? Yeah. We spent a lot of time in these residential farmhouse studios in Surrey. There were a lot of them.
Which is very nice. And that was Tim Palmer, who was good company, man. That was good times, wasn't it?
Yes. So Tim Palmer is the guy. He worked with Tin Machine, and he didn't produce it. He mixed 10 by Pearl Jam.
Oh wow.
So he was kind of a big name at the time. And I think the label wanted us to work with a big name kind of guy just to see what would happen. But he was British, wasn't he, Will?
Yeah.
Tim Palmer? Yeah. He was a good guy. Yeah.
In the wake of Nirvana and Radiohead, and from a fan's perspective, my assumption is that every band that gets signed gets $1 million contract and is like totally taken care of. But to your point, as time goes on, I talked to a band recently that said that their advance from their label was $15,000, of which they owed their lawyer who looked over the contract $12,000 of that. So they said that their initial deal was nothing. So what kind of deal did you guys get, if you don't mind sharing that?
Well, I don't. I mean, I think when we signed the deal, I got 500 quid, and they said, go and buy some clothes, and I spent it all. Spent it all playing pool at the Bell in Stourbridge. There was no big lumps of cash, and if there had been, frankly, what we wouldn't have done is gone and bought sports cars and gone and torn up Camden Town in London. We still would have spent it all at the playing pool.
Yeah.
Yeah. The money was all, it was like,
we spent a lot of money,
I'm
but we never got
it was sort of
any,
tens of thousands of pounds, but it was all earmarked for things that weren't us. I mean, it's like, it's amazing really how everybody involved with the project got paid. Like everybody around us got paid except us, right? I mean, we didn't get paid. We would get like a per diem when we went and did shows. It's like the crew would get paid, the soundman would get paid, the driver would get paid. We would get like 10 quid to spend on cigarettes, right?
So literally, and, the band that I was talking about is the band Ivy, and they were on Atlantic, and their story is exactly your story. They said everybody got paid. They said Motel 6 got paid, Waffle House and Denny's got paid. The van driver got paid. The catering got paid. We didn't get paid.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite stories was actually when we were making Home Truths. We were in another one of these very posh, fancy residential farmhouse studios in Surrey. And, we're living in the studio. We're there for like 6 weeks or something like that. Like all our food's being made for us, and it's everything's sort of being done for us. And then halfway through, me and Clive had to get on a train and go back to Stourbridge so we could sign on the dole, because we didn't have any money and we didn't have a job. We had to go and get our welfare check halfway through recording the record. And then back down to Surrey, pretending like we weren't actually working. So yeah. It was a weird time for sure. Yeah.
So you said you were doing some touring before the record, or in 93 and 94. Were you instantly out in the US, or were you doing stuff at home first, or what did touring look like early on?
I happen to have the gig diary open here.
So while you're pulling that up, let me ask you that question. So obviously you were keeping all that back in the day, keeping track of everything?
Well, Dave I
didn't write a diary. I just, for some reason, I wrote down every gig that we ever played after we did it, just in my Filofax. And it wasn't like I was keeping notes on what happened at every gig. I just wrote them down and who we played with. So yeah, I actually do have a record of that going all the way.
So here we go. I've got here. We signed the deal on the 28th of October '92. I won't tell you all the gigs, but we played with Pulp that Christmas at the Powerhouse in London, and we played in Camden, Middlesex Uni, Keele Uni, Bradford Uni, Sussex Uni, Cambridge Junction, Bath Moles. In the March, we played with Radiohead at the Camden Underworld. Then we went to Glamorgan Uni, Warwick Uni, Leeds, Duchess of York. That's one I can actually remember. We played, so the Market Tavern in Kidderminster comes up. Newcastle Riverside, which is another one I can remember.
Around that time, we got the
Fiddler,
we got the single of the week in the NME like around that time, right? So we put out an EP first, before Junkfuel was released, and that would have been actually we put out a couple of EPs, didn't we?
Yeah,
and that was really the first thing that we did, and then we started playing sort of. I don't know if we ever exactly toured. We did a lot of gigs, but they never sort of felt very congruent.
And this is all in '93. These were all gigs, decent gigs actually in the UK. We squeezed in recording Junkfuel, London Uni, Hull Adelphi, Leeds Duchess of York. I remember that one. Manchester Uni, the Market Tavern, and then 2 weeks later, New York Limelight supporting Midway Still.
That was that the first American gig?
Looks like it. So that was November the 2nd, '93, New York Limelight, and I have no recollection of that whatsoever. Isn't that weird? Yeah.
No recollection of the show, but do you remember what your feelings were when you came to the US and kind of took in the US?
Well, I'm just looking at this. I think the one so we went New York, Boston.
Do we play Brownies then at that time as well?
I'm not seeing Brownies immediately here, but I remember New Jersey Melody Bar. I'm pretty sure I remember that. That was Midway Still.
I seem to remember that EP had come out. It got single of the week earlier in '93, and then I think it was for CMJ maybe.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what time of year that is, but I know that they put out Twisted as a single, like a 7-inch single for CMJ.
Yeah.
And I think we went to New York and played some of those shows around that whole CMJ convention at the time.
So this is interesting. Yeah. So we played a few gigs in that November, and then we must have. So then we went to Madison and mixed Junkfuel in with Mr. Colson.
That's right.
And then in the January we're back to New Jersey, and I remember Asbury Park. So I remember.
I remember that.
Yeah, what amazing gig that was. So to answer your question about traveling, how I felt, landing in America that I guess what would have been the second time, absolutely feeling like king of the world, really. You'd land at JFK and they'd send a town car out, so you'd be picked up in a limo, taken to Lowe's Hotel.
Some fancy hotel they put you up in,
and so you'd get, you'd be there, you'd have a, it would just be very nice, and then you'd start getting taken out for dinner. The record company just, all had credit cards that needed to be emptied, so you'd have dinner, you'd be going to gigs, and people want to meet the band, so look, it was flipping amazing, and still that culture shock for me as a lad from Stourbridge. But bearing in mind, the first time I'd been on a plane was my trip to New York to sign the record deal, and I never really expected to leave the country, let alone fly to New York to sign a record deal. So you'd land at JFK. Somebody would stand there with your name. You'd jump in a town car and you'd be rolling along, the freeway next to the yellow cabs, bouncing along, and just think, okay, fine. Well, clearly, this is it. We've made it.
It was almost bizarre, wasn't it? Just like just complete, like I said earlier on, just sort of a very sort of alien experience. Because to me, America was like, it was exactly like it looked on TV. That was the weirdest thing about it.
It's not quite a culture shock because
you're very familiar with
know
it already,
all, right?
Yeah, but suddenly you're immersed in it, right? Yeah, yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
So the album comes out in 94.
Mm-hmm.
And then you tour. And like I said, I saw you, I think probably 94, 95, or whenever, 94-ish. Was it all headlining stuff, or were you picking up? It was funny because when I sent you that article, when I interviewed you, I think, I don't have it right in front of me, but I think you were talking about hoping to get on a couple tours.
Yeah. And that, I think, now, with respect to Oingo Boingo, I don't think we had the best luck getting on a tour, and I don't know what the situation
I was going to say, I feel like this is where, for all the limos and fancy hotels, this is sort of where the label didn't do a very good job, which was finding a good tour to put us on. Like, I think that could have made a big difference back in the day, but somehow we never actually ended up doing a proper tour with a proper headliner, right? Which I think we could have really benefited from. We played a bunch of shows with Boingo, but that always seemed like a weird fit to me.
That's very weird. Yeah.
We didn't really know them or their music, or it was pretty peculiar. So I think that was a bit of a miss, and I'm not really sure why that didn't come together better. We did do our own headlining gigs. They would have been in some much smaller places.
So apologies,
like Sudsy Malone, for example.
So well, indeed, and Brownies, which I think we all remember fondly in New York, and then Club Lingerie in LA.
In LA, yeah.
Yeah. So Brennan's Bar in LA, and then it's funny, looking through this list, Brennan's Bar LA, Kidderminster Market Tavern.
I think we headlined the Troubadour in LA? That was kind of
could be.
We did all right in LA.
So it looks like
and learned to love it as well. I didn't get on with LA to start with at all, but then really settled in.
So it looks like when I talked to you, you were hoping to get on a tour with the Meat Puppets.
Oh, okay.
We did play with them, but it wasn't a tour. But we definitely played with them 3 or 4 times. I seem to recall we played with them in Boston because we opened for Hole and the Meat Puppets. And then we played with them in Toronto. I remember they were nice guys. I don't remember. I think that might have been all we did with them. But yeah, so that was around that time as well. Yes.
So
basically, we just like ran into a lot of big bands. We were big band adjacent.
Yeah.
Shall we say?
So in hindsight, being able to look back and, I don't want to play the regrets game, but do you feel like if you had been on a tour, if you had been opening for somebody, that this might be a whole different story?
There's a million sliding doors moments could have happened, but I think overwhelmingly, the huge luck we had to be in a band and be professional musicians for, I don't know, 15 years, whatever it was, tour America. I mean, Dave and Matt now live in America because they married American girls. So really, regret, and what could have been really doesn't come into it. What is strange is that for a long time, for a very, very long time, this whole musical career was a past life, and there was even a time where I'd say, I really don't want to talk about that. It's long. I need to kind of. I've moved on. I'm doing something different now, so it's funny that we broken through that period, and I don't know, perhaps because of the 30-year nostalgia cycle, perhaps because of COVID, perhaps just because I went to see Buffalo Tom in December 2019, and just had this overwhelming feeling of, I really want to do that. You know, that so could be us. I mean, we wouldn't be as good because they were amazing, but we could totally be on that stage in this room doing this now. And I just had this, you know, and that was when we started talking about it. Guys, we can do this. Let's start talking about doing it.
Yeah.
But there was that period where it was kind of gone, you know. And part of the reason why we can't remember very much of it is we haven't been talking about it for 20 years.
Sure. Well, I don't want to gloss over the second record, right? So the first record is out. Does a label, like, had you run through the album cycle, or did the label say, okay, let's get you back in the studio? Or like, what was that between the first and second record? What was going on?
The one thing I really remember about that gap was that it felt really long. Like, I think we were kind of itching. By the time we were done with Junkfuel and we put it out and toured, you know, we'd made a couple of videos and we come home, and I think we were just kind of itching to keep the ball rolling, right? To like get back in the studio and write more songs and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I'll be honest, I don't actually know how many records we sold of Junkfuel. I have no clue. It's probably out there on the internet somewhere these days, but like, ask ChatGPT, it'll tell you.
Yeah.
Or convincingly
5 million.
With an answer anyway.
Yeah, it'll just make up something impressive sounding. But I will say, I don't think that it was enough records really for us to have made a second record on a major label, which is where the sort of the Nick Gatfield connection came in, I think. Like we could have been done after that record, but he was like, I want to give you guys another shot. And I think at that point, though, the pressure started coming on, probably more on Clive. I'm going to say he probably got more of this to, you know, go out there and write a hit single kind of thing for the second record. And so we made a lot of demos. We did a lot of demos in between Junkfuel and Home Truths. And it just felt like a real sort of slow process. I think we kind of felt like we got it at some point or another. And then the label was like, you know, keep trying. And so, I mean, there was a 4-year gap between those two records. I don't think we needed 4 years to make a second record. You know what I mean? Like we were fired up at that point. But, you know, we couldn't tell them what to do. So, you know, that we were kind of stuck with it, really.
And I don't know, because you said like you were sort of given that second album opportunity. Did you go into that kind of knowing that second record was going to be it?
Oh no, I mean I don't think so. Will, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we were like, we're going to be doing this forever. You know, I think at that point,
I wouldn't have given it that much perspective. I'm afraid to say, I would have been enjoying myself, following my nose, doing what was in front of me, singing the songs, enjoying the hell out of it. And yes, and not thinking about success or failure, really, which is a very luxurious place to be.
Yeah. So you did come out of the gate into the ocean, was at least for a blip on the radar on MTV, and won that 12 Angry Viewers or whatever the show was. I actually remember watching that, and I'm almost positive that was when they brought a bunch of people together, right? And they played videos, and then I am almost positive that a woman that I went to college with that lived next door to me and went to the journalism program that I graduated from, I'm almost positive that she was on one of those episodes, and I think it was on the episode you guys were on. But so like, did that propel a little bit? Was that the hit single that the label was sort of looking for?
Well, the video was fantastic,
yeah,
and a lot of fun. And by the way, the videos in general were where a lot of money was spent. We've Twisted, Direct Approach, and
we did the 3, didn't we?
Yeah, and Into the Ocean. Yeah, that's a wedge of dollars right there. But no, look, that was fantastic, and the video was a work of creative genius, really, and really enjoyed. And yeah, I mean, it felt like, well, this could be it. This could be it.
Well, this was another place where we got a bit unlucky. So we had a lot of good luck, and then we also had some sort of, essentially career-killing bad luck. And what happened right around that time was that Universal Music Group bought all the other record labels, right? And so this was right. Again, if we'd put that record out earlier, like, who knows? But I mean, again, hindsight's 2020, right? But they put Home Truths out, and not long after that, they had the huge label merger, where a lot of labels were just folded in under Universal, and they just, cut all the catalogs, and it was, I'm sure there were a whole ton of bands that got the boot at that point that hadn't sold 1 million records, us being one of them. So I think that was the Into the Ocean video was very exciting because if I remember rightly, the prize for winning the show was they would give you like a week or a month or something of like rotation on MTV, which was like a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
And so the label was very pleased with that outcome because we got this time on MTV. But soon after that, it just sort of, I don't know, everything sort of fizzled, didn't it? Really, Will? Would you agree?
It did, and I look. It's easy to kind of blame the industry and everything else, but wasn't my impression, and this may be completely wrong time-wise, but wasn't the creation of music at that time kind of changing? When was Gomez? When did that? Am I getting that wrong? Gomez's first album, which was kind of the people started talking about just recording albums in garages, and we were a big, expensive lump of a band that had never sold any records. Right. And suddenly you've got these younger lads coming through who would record a record themselves.
It's funny to say younger lads coming through. I think we were what, like 24 or 25 at the time.
So Gomez put out their first record in '98. So yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Right. So I wasn't massively wrong. Makes a change.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. There was a sort of a change in the industry around that time, wasn't there?
Well, I think we must have been costing, I don't know, $100,000 a month.
Well, I actually met up with some years after. We were dropped and we'd sort of gone our separate ways. I ran into our old A&R man, and I think he told me he reckoned that, like, I think he said that we had like spent like $1 million basically, like on, in the time that we had been on their label.
They, easily.
And I was like, oh, well, yeah. It would have been nice to see some of that, but,
But they could have just given it to us and moved on.
But I mean, that's just it. I mean, these are like massive record labels, aren't they?
It's an industry.
They'll just write that off.
It's an industry, and they are ruthless. When okay, we've dropped $1 million on that, it hasn't worked. We will move on. And to be fair, as we've already said, we had a pretty good crack of the whip. But that was a time when it was a risky time, and we paid for it, I guess.
So a lot of the bands that I talked to have that story of out on the tour for the second record or third record and stuck in the middle of Iowa or Ohio or Missouri, and they get a call before they're going on stage that they've been dropped. Were you guys formally dropped? Were you on tour, or was it?
I don't recall it ever happening. We kind of went home, and that was that. I don't. Well, do you recall a message, Dave? I don't know.
It definitely didn't happen like that. It wasn't like there was this moment where we suddenly got a call and we were like, it's all over. We had parted ways with our manager just before that happened.
Right, yeah, of course.
And we were sort of, I think we were quite aware at that point that the writing was on the wall, right? We didn't have a manager. We were kind of looking around for a new manager. Like Clive was kind of dealing with the label on his own, and Matt and myself were getting ready to move to the States. That was all sort of happening at the same time. And so I think it wasn't like I recall a call coming in, but I think when we got the news, however it came in, it just was kind of like, oh, well, okay. I think we might have been mentally prepared for it at that point.
Yeah.
It seemed like we had reached the end of something before the end actually came.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And I mean, we talk a lot on the Dig Me Out podcast about that time period, maybe a few years in that same sort of general time frame, is like when new metal started, like Korn and Limp Bizkit were coming out, right? And that was the next flavor of the month. So you guys were not going to survive in that world.
No. I mean, our sort of our time had passed in terms of the alternative rock scene, I think, for sure.
Yeah. So,
or at least at that point.
So Dave, now's the right time to talk about this. So that was like, to me, sort of the early-ish days of the internet. And as one of my favorite bands of the time period, you sort of disappeared. And so I don't think Google was even around. It was probably Yahoo or AOL, something. So you played in a band in Baltimore. I was able to find that you had done some more music stuff. Will, you dropped off. Like, I couldn't Google you or Yahoo you or search for you. Like, I couldn't find anything about you, but I was interested in what happened to the band. And I think, Dave, it was you I got some information about being in another band.
Yeah, I kept going. I know Matt has been playing as well this whole time. I think of the four of us, I might be the one who sort of took it the most seriously going forward. Like, none of us, while we were still in Fretblanket, none of us ever played with any other musicians. Like, we didn't have any side projects. We didn't go off and do separate things. But once I'd moved over here, because I mean, this is the thing about Fretblanket. It's like it wasn't like we even came to a point where we're like, the band is breaking up. It's like we never even had that conversation. We just sort of went our separate ways and we're like, see you in a few months. And that sort of turned into years. And,
yeah. So
being in the DC area, I met some guys. I used to go up to Baltimore all the time. They had a nice little music scene going on at the end of the 90s there. There's some really good sort of power pop bands. And so I just sort of joined, played bass in one of those bands for a while. I played guitar in a band in DC for a couple of years. And then I've been playing bass with some guys down in Virginia as well. So I've sort of always just kind of kept my hand in, made some more records, but it was always, at that point, it never felt ever again like a career, if you know what I mean. It was like I've done that. I'm like, this is a hobby. I've learned to play the guitar. It would be foolish to put it down now. I'm just going to keep playing because I like playing, and so it was my hobby at that point. But I'm glad I kept it up.
And Matt continued to be in bands after Fretblanket.
I know he kept playing. Yeah, I'm not sure what his projects actually were, but I know he kept he's still got his old kit and he still plays it. Yeah.
I think Clive did a little bit down in Brighton.
He did,
but this was. I mean, I think the point is none of. I mean, even Dave, who was the most into it, it was not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It never felt like it was a sort of a. I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed playing in those bands with those guys, but it wasn't. It couldn't possibly have been the same as playing with the guys I grew up with,
So those years,
you did a bit of singing at one point, didn't you, Dave, as well?
That came much later, but I was doing a little bit of that, but not lead singing. No.
So again, looking on paper, and it probably felt different to you, but having started when you were, 13, 14, 15, it seems like you were, and like I said, this might sound funny and I might be totally wrong. It sounded like you were smart to sort of get out when you got out. You were able to get that youthful stuff out. And then, you know, there's a lot of bands who are still pushing it. A lot of those bands that I grew up, the 80s bands, right? The 80s hair metal bands, this is all they've ever done. And they're rotating lineups, and a lot of them don't have any original members but one. Some of them don't have any original members at all. You know, but like right. It seemed like you guys were kind of realized, okay, it's time. I did this and now it's time to move on. Is that fair to say?
Well, I remember as a lot of, you know, musicians end up doing, I ended up living in my, you know, girlfriend's flat, and she she went traveling around the world, and I was 25, and I kind of thought, well, you know, I better do something. You know, this isn't gonna work. And you know, sorry, this is not the most interesting rock and roll story in the world, but the interesting thing is that when Dave and Clive had been signing on, I was never very good at that, because when people ask me if I want to do something, I say yes and then think about it afterwards. And so people used to ask me, do you want to come and do this day's work? And this was almost all the way through the band's career. You know, are you doing anything tomorrow? Come and foot some ladders on a building site for us. So I'd do that. And I ended up doing a bit of telecoms work, and then suddenly that was all I knew how to do. And I was doing a bit of telecoms work, and then as I say, when Elaine went off around the world, I thought, well, I better perhaps give this a bit of focus. And that's when the dogged perseverance or focus part of my personality came in, and I just gave that 110% instead of Fretblanket.
Yeah,
because that's the way it went.
And then I think I would say around that time I don't know when that exactly was, but around that time when I started Googling your name, I started getting results, and I had to do the, you know, the side-by-side pictures. Is that the guy from Fretblanket? It looks kind of like him, but like an older, wiser guy from Fretblanket. And so then I'm thankful for this Dig Me Out, because I've always wanted to reach out to you and be like, hey, I love your music, but this gives me a real opportunity. But I've been sort of stalking you on the internet from afar for a couple of years, just so you know.
This happened, and this was COVID, of course. So and modern technology and all that has really enabled a lot of this stuff. So after we started talking in 2019 about doing the gigs, which of course then, because of COVID, didn't happen. But I put some of the unreleased recordings on YouTube, and people like yourself started finding me on LinkedIn. You know, that the most rock and roll of all the social media platforms, and this gave me a bit of, you know, additional, you know, is that really you? Is this new stuff? Are you guys touring again? You know, it was like, well, no, but thanks for the interest. That's very flattering and everything. And then of course this brings us kind of up to date. So we decided it in the Christmas of 2020. You know, well, maybe we can do some gigs, and we had a bit of a Fretblanket conference about it. Why do we want to do a gig? You know, I was just very keen to say, I just really, really want to do a gig. And I imagine doing a gig in London and a gig in Stourbridge, and this is what it was. And there were various other options kind of thrown around, but that was my imagination. Anyway, of course, then that didn't happen. But I did an acoustic performance for a mate during lockdown, and that got the juices flowing. And then COVID ended, and we started talking again about maybe doing it. And here we are. We have the gigs planned for April the 12th, 2023, at the Lexington in Islington in London, and April the 15th, 2023, at a venue I could probably chuck an apple onto the roof of from where I am now, in Kidderminster. And then we were talking about it. We thought, well, this material, that the stuff that, so we missed a whole section here. So right at the end of this period that we're talking about, when it all closed down, right at the very end of that, Clive and Tim Patalan, who recorded the Home Truths, managed to organize getting us to Tim's place in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we recorded 12 or 14 songs, and it was amazing. I mean Tim's the most amazing force of nature ever, and extremely talented, and we recorded the hell out of these songs, and with no record company money, as I understand it. So basically Tim, fed us.
Yeah, you just let us go there, didn't
and we lived at his place, and he recorded, and at one point the tape machine broke, and he did one of those crazy American 28-hour round trips to get the tape machine fixed and come back, and we're just living there and doing that, and it was the best stuff we've ever recorded. I mean, okay, mate, would it have been 5% better if we'd had $100,000 from the record company spent on it? Maybe, but it's come out, it stands up, and
I think they were intended to be. It was almost intended to be a sort of a demo reel, right? For like if we were going to go off and seek, new management, new label, that kind of thing.
But Tim's so creative. He would
because,
never do anything. He would never do
what I'm
anything
saying. I
mean,
his demos are, I mean, exceedingly good. I mean, that was album quality recordings that he did for us.
Well, one thing that Nick of the record company was used to say, this guy can get stuff down on tape impeccably.
He works a lot with a band from Columbus, Ohio called Watershed, and they had a similar. They had one record out on Epic, and that was it for them. Back in around the same time period that you guys, but they do a lot of work with Tim. I knew I recognized his name, and they continue every couple of years to go up to Michigan and record with him. So that name is familiar to me.
Well, we're trying to get in touch with Tim. We'd love him to hear the release and perhaps bump into him one day. Although I'm concerned that 20 years in telecoms may have made our worlds very, very distantly different these days. But anyway, we selected 8 of the tracks. With it's been emotional, kind of leaving a couple off, and put together an 8-track album, which I'm very proud of. I think it's our best stuff, and it's called the Distance in Between, and it's being released at the end of March. And and that is, I mean, what a treat, really, to have released 2 albums so early, and then gone off and done 24 years of work and raise a family, and paying a mortgage and everything else, and then go, actually, up my sleeve here, I've got another. Let's release this amazing album that we recorded.
It's pretty great.
Will there be a physical release, or is it digital only?
We have pressed up 100 CDs, which are sitting at Clive's house,
just in case anyone still has a CD player.
And it's all, well, no one has, of course, but we wanted an artifact.
Sure.
But it'll be available on Bandcamp, and the CD will be available on Bandcamp, and posters and t-shirts and all of that good stuff. So we're
there's a lot of bands in your boat that are doing vinyl. Did you think about that at all?
Well, the funny thing is, vinyl wasn't our era. I know.
Right.
I know middle-aged guys are supposed to collect vinyl, but we were post vinyl in the first place, So, although to be fair, we had all the ride EPs, didn't we? On vinyl.
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff.
Vinyl wasn't like back then. It wasn't exactly something
Not
you
at
had
all.
to have, was it?
The exciting purchase for Appetite for Destruction on CD, In Utero on CD.
Yeah,
the big things I remember. Yeah.
I still have a huge collection of cassette tapes with albums that I copied off my friends, off their cassette.
But I'm talking about the new record. Did you think about doing that on vinyl? That whole wave of nostalgia. This band that I was really into in the 90s called Triple Fast Action. They put out a record on Capitol and got dropped. They put out a record on Deep Elm, which is sort of like this emo label, and then they broke up. They have been clearing all their old tapes out. So they literally last week, they just put up for pre-order on Bandcamp a 3-album set of 27 songs that are demos that no one ever heard. And it just seems to be like bands from this era are starting to sort of empty out the shelves, and vinyl's what people our age collect these days. And so that
maybe that'll be the next thing. We'll go back to our pre-Junkfuel catalog.
Well, people aren't clamoring at the door. I think this it will. Well, we're fortunate. So those guys probably haven't got an album they recorded in the year 2000 that they can.
Right.
So we're blessed in that regard.
True.
So the one thing, and I don't know if it's country wise or whatever, but I fortunately have the advanced copy of Home Truth, but it's not on Spotify at least.
No, which is frustrating, and we're trying to work out how to fix that.
I heard that it used to be, well, it was the other way around. It used to be that Junkfuel wasn't available online and Home Truth was, and now somehow it's gone the other way, and we don't know why. But what it's probably going to involve is, talking to somebody at Universal Music Group and trying to convince them to give us the rights to put it on.
Or picking our moment. Or picking our moment and just uploading it anyway and seeing what happens. But don't really want to do that just yet, because it might break. They'll take all of our music down if. But there must be a way, and because Junkfuel, for all its charm, and a lot of people, like you, Chip, we're getting lovely messages from people who absolutely loved Junkfuel. I think it's fair to say it was a youthful record, and Home Truths is really a good bit of work. So it would be nice to get that more of an airing for people who are interested, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I will follow that up and tell you that Junkfuel is, I still listen to that regularly, and I still like it still hits me the same way it did. I was interviewing Steve Kilby from The Church, and we were talking about how music transcends time, whereas you might see a movie and you might see it twice or 3 times, or if it's on TV you might catch it again, or a book you might read once or twice. But music, I mean, he was saying records that I bought 50 years ago I still listen to and get a pleasure out of, and really I listen to Junkfuel, and it takes it to me, it's not even a nostalgic thing. Like, it sounds, I'm still shocked that didn't sell 2 million records and that you weren't headlining arenas. I mean, it just had, it's
very kind
of you.
It's very kind. I mean, so for me, it's Mezcal Head by Swerve Driver that I swear to God I listen to at least once a week, for the past 24 years, and I still hear new things in it. I still just get the same rush out of it every single time. So it is amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
That is a fantastic record. And that was my introduction to what I would later learn was kind of called shoegaze. Like, I heard that before I heard My Bloody Valentine, and I just knew that I listened to it and I loved it.
We have a Swerve Driver story as well, although I think some of the guys in the band don't remember it this way, but I definitely remember it this way, which is that we were in New York. The band was in New York for something, and the label had got us tickets to see Bob Dylan at Madison Square Garden, and Van Morrison was opening for Bob Dylan. And the same night, Swerve Driver was playing in some dive bar on the other side of Manhattan. And I can't remember exactly where it was, but I distinctly remember that we were like, fine, we'll go to the Dylan thing and then we'll go and see Swerve Driver. But because Van Morrison went on and on and on and on, by the time Dylan came out, it was time for us to go. And so I think we saw maybe like 2 songs of Bob Dylan. And then the 4 of us like got up and were like, excuse us, past all the, the seated patrons who were there to see Bob Dylan. They were all looking at us going like, why are you leaving this concert? Yeah. And the reason was because we wanted to go over to see Swerve Driver in a dive bar. And it was totally worth it.
It was totally worth it. It was amazing, but I remember it being a hell of a crush. Do you remember squeezing in at the back of that gig?
Yeah.
Wow, what a night! We could do that again.
But I distinctly remember as well that I think we were with our A&R guy, or we were with somebody who knew them, and after the show he said, do you want to go say hello to the band? And I was like, no, like I did not want to meet them. Like I didn't want to go and meet them. And that was exactly the reason why, because I was like, what happens if they turn out to be arseholes?
Yeah.
So that's weird, isn't it? I was like, no, I want to keep this separate. You know, I'm just going to listen to their music. I don't want to know. I don't want to meet them. Very odd.
So where do you guys
meet them, Will?
Where do you guys? Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. What did you say, Dave?
Oh, I just said, did you ever meet them? Like,
No. And I mean, you know, so many of it's strange, isn't it? The guys you meet who are lovely and the guys you meet who actually aren't so nice. You know, it's funny. I mean, Perry Farrell, you know, the nicest guy in the world. You know, and Tom York.
Mate, you might have to cut this part out as well, but depending on what he says next.
Well, Tom York, you know, hey Tom, really excited to be here playing with you. You know, this is nice. You know, I know he has his, you know, emotional problems and everything, but it's just strange that you wouldn't expected Perry Farrell to be the easiest chat in the world.
I interviewed Johnny Greenwood when Pablo Honey came out, right. And again, you guys remember those days. Faith No More had the big hit, the one, like the Epic was the song, right? And it was the big video. And I remember seeing Creep, and I can't find the article, but I remember saying to Johnny something along the lines of, are you worried about becoming a one-hit wonder? Because we see Faith No More has got one hit, and it's sort of, you know, are you worried about Creep is going to be your one hit? And that shows, here I am. I expect you to sell 2 million records, and I expected Radiohead to be a one-hit wonder. So maybe people shouldn't trust my opinion on stuff.
Dave's done more of the star chatting than any of us, I think. I was properly awestruck when you were chatting with the Beastie Boys at that Green Day concert.
Oh, well, I don't think I was actually chatting with them. I sat next to Mike D. It really, like I said before, you know, we've been sort of big band adjacent our entire career. We're almost like sort of the Forrest Gump of, you know, indie rock, I think. We sort of turn up in places where famous people are and, you know, run into them at key moments, but remain invisible.
So tell me, where do you guys stand today in terms of listening to stuff? Are you still music consumers? Are you listening to a lot of stuff? Or you fall back on your favorites from 10, 20, 30 years ago? Or
I don't. I do precious little, really. Clive's just introduced me to the Guy Garvey Six Music show, and I'm finding that to be a good source of music. But no, in fact, it's for me, I have to admit, it's curated stuff. I don't find stuff to my shame.
I've developed a bit of a, I don't know, I don't know whether this is just a function of getting old, but it's sort of like, I think I've come to appreciate musicianship more as I've gotten older. Like when I was younger, music was more about that sort of, you know, visceral feeling, right? Like you like listening to sort of loud, angsty guitar rock because it makes you feel good. And it didn't really matter whether the guys could play that well. It was more the sound and the power of it or whatever. As I've gotten older, I think I've definitely learned to appreciate more sort of very talented musicians, and it's sort of genre agnostic, really. Like I don't know, like I know Will knows this, but the band that I've been listening to more than any other recently is the Punch Brothers, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but Chris Thiele, you know, the sort of the bluegrass, progressive bluegrass band.
Yeah.
And I just can't get enough of that stuff. It's amazing. And it's really just to do with the unbelievable quality of the musicianship and just the talent. When you listen to them do it, they just make it sound so sort of effortless.
Yeah.
I don't know, just that kind of thing just strikes a chord with me these days. So yeah, that's one I've been listening to a lot.
So when we started this, or before we started, you asked me kind of how long. We're at an hour and a half, so this is probably a good place to wrap it up. Again, I'll just, you mentioned new old record coming out. 2 shows. Do you think that will be the final bow on Fretblanket, or do you think there's something here?
So it's hard to see past these 2 shows, and do I think this is the start of something? No. Right. But I'm also, I we're going to be around for a long time, so there may be other opportunities. There's some 50th birthdays, some 55th birthdays, other things coming up. And I think really what this shows is that we can do it. I mean, so funnily enough, at the moment, of course, Clive and I are rehearsing to a tape that Dave and Matt recorded. We haven't got in a room yet, so it might be a disaster. But I think the expectation is that when the 4 of us get in the room, it's going to be bloody brilliant.
Yeah. And
then we're going to produce 118 minutes of well, pure indie rock majesty, and then for that and then stop and have to go into the day job. I think it's not the start of something, Chip.
Yeah.
But that's not to say we won't ever do it again.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah. Speaking for myself, this is sort of a personal thing, and I think it is for the other guys too. This was not supposed to be about putting out a record or even playing gigs. Just something that I think we all wanted to do. At one point in our life before we got too old to do it, was to just get back in a room again with just the 4 of us and play some music. Well, and this is sort of an outgrowth of our desire to do that. So I'm going to say, after we do this, we have no plans to do anything else. But I don't think the desire to get back into a room with these 4, the 4 of us, is going to go away. Yeah. So I'm sure we're going to do something again in the future at some point.
For me, it was very specifically a gig, a performance. I wanted to get under the lights in front of a crowd and do that thing.
Yeah, have that feeling again. Yeah,
well, that's a hell of a for well, I think I'd say what rush is there like that? I haven't been an astronaut or a fighter pilot, but I suspect being at the front of a rock band is better.
All right.
That seems like a great place to end this.
All right, mate.
Awesome. Good. Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to have done my stalking and found you, and I'm even more excited that the news came out about the new album and stuff. So it was very cool to have that chance to catch up with you guys, and looking forward to hearing the record.
Great to talk to you, Chip. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thanks for listening. To support the podcast, visit www.patreon.com/digmeout and become a monthly subscriber at www.digmeoutpodcast.com, where you can find links to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.